Now, this here on the screen, you have the different characteristics of life. Okay, so this means these are the different categories that would make us say that something is living. Okay, so we say something is alive if first it is exhibiting growth and development. Okay, something is growing, something is having development, that we can say that something or that thing is living. Okay, so this is one component of a living thing. It has growth and development, that we can say that it is a living thing. It is an organism. Now, another thing is that another important consideration is that it should be able to reproduce. Okay, it should be able to have offsprings. It should be able to have kids, okay, or children. Okay, so this is another consideration that something is living. So again, first, it should have growth and development. Secondly, it should be able to reproduce. And third here, it should be able to transmit its genes, its DNA, to its offsprings. Okay, so heredity here is, of course, the transmission of genes, transmission of characteristics from the parent to the offspring. Okay, so that is the third component, the third characteristic of your living thing or your organisms. Now, fourth, we've talked about this when we studied the different organelles. We said your organelles are actually doing their specific functions because they want to maintain homeostasis. Okay, and when you say homeostasis, this is a stable inner conditions. This is the internal state of balance. It should be, everything inside your body should be balanced. Everything inside your body should be in normal conditions. Okay, so optimum conditions, normal conditions. Say if you are talking about your body temperature, your body should always be maintaining that normal body temperature so that you can continue functioning. Okay, so that's your homeostasis. Again, that's a stable inner condition. So that is still another consideration, another characteristic of living organisms. Now, the last, or the third to the last that we have here is metabolism. When you say metabolism, this means that a thing is needing energy. It uses energy. It needs energy so that it can survive, so that it can do its processes. Okay, so metabolism here is that characteristic of life. This is actually made up of two types. There is anabolism, the building up processes. Then, of course, you also have catabolism, which is the breaking down processes. So again, when you say metabolism here, this means the organism needs energy. Okay, it can produce energy from the chemical reactions. Of course, we know that this happens in the mitochondria of your cell. That is the process we call cellular respiration. And so this is a very important factor of considering whether something is living or non-living. Now, second to the last here, of course, very important, that object should have cellular organization. Okay, its body should be made up of cells. We all know that all living things are made up of cells. That's part of the three different principles that we have for your cell theory. Okay, so a living thing, an organism should have a body made up of cells. It can be just one cell in your unicellular organism. It can also be many cells in your multicellular organisms. Okay, so cellular composition, cellular structure, cellular organization, very important. For you to say that something is living, then it should have cellular organization. Then lastly here, it should be able to respond to its environment. Okay, response to any type of stimulus. This is a very important characteristic of living things. For example, if you are walking on the halls of our school, if somebody calls out your name, and usually you'd respond. Okay, you'd go and look for that person, or you'd turn your head. Okay, so response, being able to give a response to any types of stimulus, that would be one very important consideration that you can say that something is really living. Okay, so these here again are 7 characteristics of living things, 7 characteristics of life. So there should be growth and development. It should be able to reproduce. It should be able to transmit its genes, transmit its DNA, its characteristics to its offspring. It should be able to maintain that stable inner conditions. It should be able to perform homeostasis. There should be metabolism. That means it should be able to create energy from chemical reactions. It should be made up of cells. Can be unicellular, only has one cell, or multicellular with many cells. And of course, very important, it should be able to respond to its environment. Okay, for example, today it's very cold. So another one type of response that we have is we wear thick clothes, okay, or we layer up our clothes. Okay, so that's the 7 characteristics of life that we have. And we are going to use this to measure or to decide whether your viruses are non-living or living. Okay, now we go to the term viruses. This is actually very relevant to our age and time right now, especially now. We're doing everything. We're doing our classes virtual because of the presence of a virus. Okay, that's because of the pandemic that we are currently facing. Okay, now viruses here, when you say viruses, these are biological entities. They contain either DNA or RNA, just one of these 2 nucleic acids. It cannot be both of them. Okay, so your viruses can only contain a DNA or RNA, just either of the 2. That require another cell to survive. Okay, so this part here is very important. Your virus cannot survive if it does not have the host cell. So it has to have a host cell so that it can survive. Now, another thing, it has some but not all of the characteristics of life. Okay, so we've just talked about the 7 characteristics of life, and we say your viruses have some of these, but other characteristics of life they don't have. Okay, so we will try to find out what these characteristics are. All right, now going to your next slide here, this shows you your viral structure. Okay, now looking at the structure of your virus here, you can see that this actually is not considered a cell. Okay, it is not considered a cell because it doesn't have any of the organelles that your cells would have. Okay, now the envelope here, this is like the plasma membrane, the cell membrane of your cell, but of course we don't call this a cell membrane because this is not a cell. Okay, so your virus is not considered a cell. And of course, it has its DNA, can be a DNA or an RNA, not both of them. And very importantly, your virus has this protein coat, which we call the capsid. Okay, so capsid there, it is a very important component of your viral structure because this is a component that would protect the DNA or the RNA of your virus. Okay, and so it is very difficult for your virus to get destroyed because of this protective layer that they have, the protein coat, which we call the capsid. Okay, any questions with regards to the viral structure? So again, we don't consider it a cell. It does not have the nucleus. It does not have any of the parts of the cell. It only has a covering here, which we call the envelope. Okay, that's the boundary of your viral structure. There is a DNA or an RNA, not both of them. Okay, no, never both of them. And of course, protecting your DNA or your RNA is the protein coat, which you call capsid. Okay, so basically, it's a very simple structure for your virus. Now, viruses are often called, we often call them pathogens. When you say pathogens here, this term means disease causing. Okay, so your diseases, many of the diseases that we're facing are actually caused by your viruses. So some examples for this, of course, are the flu, your chicken pox, your mumps, measles, AIDS, and of course, COVID-19. Our pandemic, the one that closed all the schools right now, it's because of your virus, which is of course your coronavirus. Okay, so viruses again can become lethal pathogens. And when you say pathogens, again, these are disease-causing organisms. Okay, now there is one type of virus that has caused a lot of deaths in our cows, also a lot of deaths in humans, and this is called your prions. Okay, this is a special type of virus. It has caused a lot of deaths in cows and also in humans. Your prions are actually misfolded proteins that cause mad cow diseases. Okay, so this is actually considered a virus, and it causes mad cow disease. Okay, so that's your prions there. Now, we have what we call for your virus, one very important characteristic of your viruses is that they are very specific, okay? So we call this your host cell specificity. This means that they can only infect certain types of tissues, certain types of cells. And to be able to do this, they should be bound to receptors, okay? They should be able to bind to the host cell, to the cell that they'd want to target, to the cell that they'd want to destroy, to the cell that they'd want to infect. Okay, so again, there is a term we call receptor. And when you say receptor, these are surface components in your host cell that is used as entryway of your virus. Okay, so to be able for them to be able to enter your cell, the human body, for example, or any other organism's body, they should be able to bind to a receptor. Again, when you say receptor here, this is a component of the surface of the host cell. Okay, so when you say host cell, that is the cell that your virus would target. Okay, now this is very important. This is the reason why we are always told right now to always be washing our hands. Okay, because of course we are touching a lot of surfaces, and of course your coronavirus can stay on those surfaces for several days. And so if you're not washing your hands and you are touching the surfaces of your body, for example, you touch your nose, you touch your eyes, you touch any other part of your body, there is a very big possibility that you can contract the disease, which is COVID-19. Okay, so this is precisely the reason why we should all be washing our hands. Okay, so receptors, again, these are the components on the surface of your host cell where the viruses can attach, and so they are able to enter the cell. Any questions before I proceed? Okay, if you have no questions, let me move on. Now, there are several modes of transmission for your viruses. When you say modes of transmission here, these are the methods, the ways through which viruses may be passed on from one person to another. Okay, so one form would be your insects, your ticks, your mosquitoes. Another thing would be an exchange of body fluids. Okay, so sweat, blood, mucus, even unprotected sex can become a mode of transmission. Okay, airborne. Many of those viruses are airborne, so they are transmitted through coughing, through sneezing, and so we are told to wear masks. Okay, we're wearing masks because we want to put that extra protection. Okay, so when you cough, when you sneeze, your body fluids would not be airborne, would not be exposing the rest of the people around you. Okay, so airborne. Another thing is that they can also be transmitted using direct contact. That means touching. Many of the viruses, such as flu and cold, are long-lived on surfaces. Also, even your coronavirus. Okay, so that's why we are told to always disinfect those surfaces that are usually touched. Okay, so when you go to the groceries, for example, some people would even use gloves. Okay, so they're using gloves. They should be disinfecting all the surfaces that are usually touched by people. Okay, so these are the different modes of transmission that we have for your viruses. Now, this here is your viral cycle. This is, as you can see, if you may notice, we don't call this a life cycle, okay? Because we say these viruses are not really living, okay? So we just call this a viral cycle. This usually would come out in your EOC. Okay, so you are going to be taking your common assessment today. I don't know what the items are, so make sure that you pay attention. This might be in your common assessment today. Now, you have two steps here in the viral cycle. The first one would be your light tick. This is your shorter phase or shorter stage. And the second one would be your lysogenic cycle, which is the longer stage, okay? Now, I'd like you to note that both of these stages, both of these parts of the cycle here are happening inside the host cell, okay? Remember, your virus cannot survive when it is outside a host cell. It needs an organism. It needs a host cell so that it can survive. So both of these steps here are actually happening inside the host cell, but they have many differences. So let's try to take a look at their differences here. Now, lytic cycle here, or lytic step or stage, this is a shorter stage. And in here, the viral DNA or RNA of your virus is not integrated with the host cell's DNA. Okay, that means the DNA of your virus or the RNA of your virus is not mixed, it's not combined with the host cell's DNA at this point. Okay, which actually means that your virus here is trying to have or trying to make copies of itself independently, not using the host cell's DNA. Okay, so it's making copies of itself, but it's not actually fused with the DNA of the host cell. And so because of this, we say it does not really need the host cell at that point. Okay, so since it does not need the host cell to replicate itself at this point here in your lytic cycle, it actually kills your cell. Okay, so it's killing the cell at this point here. There is what we call host cell lysis. Okay, there's lysis or death of the host cell. And so we call the lytic stage the shorter stage, and this is also the virulent stage. That means your virus here is very, very harmful. Okay, it's very harmful. It is replicating itself inside the host cell, but it's not actually using the DNA of your host cell. So it does not actually care about the host cell at this point. So what it does is that it kills all the host cell. And so we say this is the more harmful stage of the viral cycle. Now your lysogenic cycle here, lysogenic stage here, this is a longer cycle. Your lysogenic it's okay, Kendra. So your lysogenic cycle here is this one, and this is considered the longer stage in your viral cycle. Now, the most important part here, which is different between your lytic stage and your lysogenic stage, is that in your lysogenic stage, your viral DNA or RNA is actually integrated with the DNA of your host cell. So that means if you see this, if you see the black part here as the host cell's DNA, the red part here is your viral cell, your virus's DNA or RNA. And so it is integrated, it is merged, it is combined, it is fused to your host cell's DNA. Okay? And so because of this, we know that your virus here is actually making copies of itself by using the host cell's DNA. Okay, it is using the host cell's DNA. And so the host cell's DNA now is very important for your virus at this point. And so because of that, it does not kill your host cell. At this stage here, your host cell is not killed. Okay, the host cell is not lysed because it needs the DNA of your host cell. And so we say that this is the non-virulent virulent part is less harmful than your lytic stage. And of course, in here, your virus is dormant. That means it is inactive. Okay, it is inactive. It is not killing your host cell. So again, let me repeat it. One hint that I can give you is to take a look at the letters that we have here for both of your stages. For your lytic stage, you only have 5 letters. For your lysogenic stage here, you have a longer word. Okay, and so that gives us a hint that your lytic stage here is shorter. Okay, this is a shorter stage. It is also the more virulent stage. Okay, it's more harmful because what happens here again is that your virus is making copies of itself independent of the host cell's DNA. It does not use the DNA of the host cell, and so it does not really care about the host cell. It kills the host cell at this point. Okay, so lytic is shorter, but it's more harmful. It does not use the DNA of your host cell. Now, for your lysogenic stage here, again, this is the longer cycle. This is your lysogenic stage here. And as you can see, your viral DNA or RNA is merged with the DNA of your host cell. And since it is merged with the DNA of your host cell, it cannot kill your host cell at this point. Okay, so what it does is that it makes copies of itself using the DNA of the host cell. It does not kill the host cell. It cannot kill the host cell. And so this is where your virus is actually dormant. Your virus is inactive. Your virus is less virulent. Okay, so those are, again, the 2 stages of your viral cycle. Lytic stage, shorter, more virulent, more harmful. Its DNA is not merged with the DNA of your host cell, and so it kills the host cell. Lysogenic cycle, longer cycle. Okay, its DNA or RNA is merged with that of the host cell, and so it cannot kill the host cell. And so here, your virus becomes dormant, your virus becomes inactive. Okay, but this is the longer cycle. Any questions before I go to the next slide? Okay, now we go to the next slide here. What are several ways that we do so that we can fight viral pathogens, the diseases that are caused by viruses? Of course, one way for us to do this is to get vaccinated. Okay, so we have vaccines. Whenever you get your vaccine, these are actually, you're attenuated. When you say attenuated in science, this means weakened. Okay, so these are weakened pathogens. These are pathogens, these are viruses that are actually weak. Okay, they're weaker forms of viruses that are introduced into your body. And so you hear some people saying, I don't want to get the flu vaccine because you are going to get sick if you get it. Or some people right now, they're saying, I don't want to get vaccinated with the COVID vaccine. Because again, when you are vaccinated, it is an attenuated, it is a weakened form of the virus that is introduced to your body. Okay, it actually fools your body. It fools your body into thinking that you have that disease. Okay, so that virus has entered your body, and so your body is actually going to put up its defense against a certain type of disease. And so when you actually contract that disease, when you actually get the disease from any other person who has COVID, your body would already have that form of defense ready. Okay, so your vaccine is actually fooling your body into thinking that you have contracted a certain form of disease. So again, we hear some people saying that I don't want to get vaccinated because I don't want to get sick. Okay, but again, vaccines are very important, and these are actually weakened forms of your pathogens. Now, it's also very important for us to note that your viruses cannot be killed by antibiotics. Okay, so antibiotics cannot kill your viruses. Antibiotics are only effective against bacteria. Okay, against germs, against bacteria. We can't use this to cure your viruses. And so again, since your virus has that capsid, has that protective layer of protein coat. Okay, it's very, very easy for your virus to actually mutate. It's very fast for it to mutate. It's very easy for it to mutate. If we have mutations as humans, as animals, as plants, your animals can also mutate. Your virus is actually, it's very easy. It's very fast for them to mutate. So right now on the news, for example, we hear some stories about new strains of your COVID-19. Okay, so new strains of COVID-19 is actually because they have mutated. Okay, so just like your other types of cells, they can mutate, but again, I stress your viruses are not cells. These are not cells. And so going back to the different characteristics of your viruses here, checking for us to check whether it's living or non-living. Again, for cellular organization, your virus has no cellular organization. It is not considered a cell. Okay, it only has an envelope. It may have either a DNA or an RNA, but not both of them. Okay, never both of them. And of course, it has a capsid, that protein coat that protects that DNA or RNA. And so it's very difficult for us to destroy the viruses. So again, there's no cellular organization. For reproduction, they can only reproduce if they are inside a host cell. They cannot reproduce without the help of another type of organism. And so many people would say, many scientists would say that your viruses are non-living because they need another organism to help them reproduce. Okay, so this is one factor that would tell us that your virus is non-living. It is non-living because it cannot reproduce itself without the use of your host cell. Now, for metabolism, again, it does not use any amount of energy, okay? It has no use of energy because it actually has no organelles. There's no use for any of the energy for your virus, okay? Also, homeostasis, there's no homeostasis because there's no organelles. Heredity, it still would need the help of your host cells. Okay, so it needs the help of your host cells. You've seen that in the 2 stages of your viral cycle a while ago. For it to replicate, it should be inside your host cell, and your lysogenic stage, that longer stage, your viral DNA or RNA is actually incorporated with your host cell's DNA. Now, for your responsiveness, there is little amount of response from your virus. Okay, so they can respond in limited ways. And so some people would claim, other people would claim that viruses are living because they can actually respond. Okay, but again, their response is very limited. Okay, now growth and development, of course, they don't grow, they don't develop, they continue to be that way. And we'd usually say their main purpose is just to make more viruses. Okay, there is no other goal in their existence but to make more viruses.